Most people don't realize it, but the mortgage sitting on their kitchen counter may be the most dangerous financial contract they ever sign, not because of the payment itself, but because of the story behind it. One designed to look harmless while quietly shaping the next 30, 40, or even 50 years of their life. The world calls it normal, but Scripture would call it bondage, disguised as stability. And the truth is, millions are being pulled into a system that keeps them working, paying, and surviving, but never truly owning. Think about it. Why does a society with more money, more technology, and more financial tools than any other generation in history still end up drowning in debt? Why are people working harder, earning more, starting business after business, trying to make money with every strategy they can find, yet ending every month with nothing left? It's not a personal failure. It's a system built to win even when you lose. And the mortgage is one of its most powerful levers. What nobody tells you is that the affordable home loan is engineered to feel comforting while slowly draining your capacity to invest, save, build, and create. It's the modern version of Pharaoh's bricks. Work more, pay more, and somehow still owe more. And once you understand how the structure really functions, you'll see why so many families spend an entire lifetime renting from the bank instead of building biblical wealth and generational security. If you like our content, consider supporting our ministry through the link in the description. Because today we're going to expose the spiritual and financial architecture of the mortgage system, how it was designed, why it feels inescapable, and how you can break free from a cycle engineered to keep you paying until the end of your life. And once you see what's hiding behind the curtain, you'll never look at money, debt, or home ownership the same way again. The spiritual anatomy of debt. Why modern mortgages imitate ancient bondage. Debt has always carried a spiritual weight, long before it became a tool of modern business or a way to manage money. In Scripture, debt wasn't just a financial issue, it was a symbol of bondage that affected a person's identity and future. When someone lived in debt, they lived under the authority of another, unable to make money or walk freely. That's why Proverbs 22:7 says, "The borrower is servant to the lender." This ancient truth exposes exactly what today's mortgage structure tries to hide behind marketing language. Modern mortgages are often presented as neutral financial tools, but their architecture mirrors the systems of servitude Israel fought to escape. A person signs thinking they're stepping toward ownership, yet the terms lock them into decades of payments that barely touch the principal. It's a commitment that shapes decisions, emotions, and even faith. Most people don't realize that when debt dictates your life, it quietly becomes a master. And no business or family can make money wisely when they unknowingly serve two masters. In ancient Israel, God built safeguards to prevent generational bondage, sabbatical years, jubilee cycles, and strict limits on interest. These laws weren't just spiritual, they were economic. They ensured that money never became a weapon and that no person stayed trapped for life. But today's system flips that wisdom upside down. Instead of release every 7 years, people renew debt every 30. Instead of freedom for families, there is compounding interest that eats decades of income. It's the opposite of biblical stewardship. When a person locks into a mortgage structure designed for long-term dependence, it reshapes their entire financial journey. Instead of building equity early, they often spend 10 to 15 years barely reducing the amount they owe. That means less capacity to invest, less flexibility to start a business, and more pressure to make money only to keep the cycle going. It's not accidental. Systems like this survive because they know most people think in monthly payments, not in lifetime consequences. And that's the hidden spiritual layer. Debt manipulates perception. It creates the illusion of progress while holding a person in place, much like Pharaoh increasing Israel's workload while promising security. People assume they're buying a home, but in reality, many are buying a long-term contract of servitude. Once the mortgage becomes the master, dreams shrink, risks disappear, and financial faith evaporates. Money becomes something you chase, not something you steward. But there's always a way to see through the illusion. Scripture constantly warns us to seek wisdom before transactions, not after regret. When a person understands the spiritual anatomy of debt, they start to recognize patterns that once felt normal but were never biblical, and that awareness opens the door to a powerful question. If God designed financial systems for freedom, how did ours become designed for lifetime payments? That's where the next topic begins to uncover the path that brought us here. How we got here, from biblical Sabbath years to a system designed for lifetime payments. If someone really wants to understand today's mortgage system, they need to travel back, far beyond the 20th century mortgage reforms, all the way to God's original blueprint for economic freedom. In Scripture, financial structures were designed to protect families, not trap them. Leviticus 25 introduces the Sabbath year and the Jubilee, cycles where debts were forgiven and land returned. These laws weren't symbolic. They were God's way of preventing money from becoming a tool of generational oppression. Contrast that with today's system, where a mortgage doesn't reset every 7 years. It resets every time someone refinances or moves, keeping families in a permanent loop. Instead of release, there's renewal. Instead of rest, there's refinancing. Banks have learned that the most profitable business isn't one where people make money and pay off debt, but one where people keep debt forever. That's why modern mortgages are structured for decades of interest before any meaningful principal reduction. In biblical times, owning land meant stability, honor, and generational blessing. It was a symbol of God's promise. That's why losing land was so devastating. It meant losing your future. But today the system flips that idea. Instead of protecting ownership, it monetizes it. The mortgage becomes a gatekeeper, and lenders, not families, control the timeline. A 30-year mortgage already stretches the biblical concept of stewardship. A 50-year mortgage eliminates it entirely. During the Great Depression, the United States created the 30-year mortgage as a rescue mission, not a lifestyle. It was never intended to become the default path to homeownership, but as housing prices grew faster than wages, the system adapted, not to help the buyer, but to sustain the machine. Extending loan lengths was easier than fixing affordability. It's the same logic Pharaoh used when he increased Israel's workload instead of addressing their suffering. When a system benefits from bondage, it expands bondage. This is why the modern borrower often feels overwhelmed, yet convinced they're doing the normal thing. They don't realize that normal doesn't mean biblical, and it certainly doesn't mean wise. In a world where people are told to make money just to service debt, the heart of stewardship gets lost, wisdom becomes optional, and survival becomes the default. That's exactly how systems designed for lifetime payments silently replace systems designed for freedom. But here's the question the system hopes you never ask. If God created cycles of release, why does our culture create cycles of lifelong obligation? And if the path changed so drastically from Scripture to modern finance, what other illusions of affordability are we accepting without discernment? The next topic exposes exactly why modern financial comfort is often nothing more than a spiritual and economic mirage. The illusion of affordability: why lower payments cost your future. Modern finance loves to sell comfort. Lower monthly payments sounds like relief, but spiritually and financially, it's one of the most deceptive offers of our generation. The Bible constantly warns against decisions that look easy in the short term, but destroy the long-term harvest. Proverbs 14:12 says, "There is a way that seems right, but its end is death." In today's world, that way often comes packaged as affordability. But affordability isn't about what you can pay monthly, it's about what it costs over a lifetime. When someone chooses a longer mortgage just because the payment feels lighter, they unknowingly trade decades of future freedom for a few dollars today. It's like Esau selling his birthright for a bowl of soup. The immediate relief blinds them to the long-term loss. Banks understand this psychology well. They know people don't calculate total interest, they calculate emotional comfort. And when emotions lead money decisions, financial bondage becomes predictable. The illusion works because the payment feels achievable. It doesn't challenge lifestyle, it doesn't require discipline, and it doesn't force anyone to make money with purpose. But what appears manageable becomes a subtle trap. A homeowner may feel stable, but in truth, they're stuck in a business model where the lender profits for 50 years while the borrower's equity grows at a snail's pace. It's the financial equivalent of sowing, but barely reaping. Consider a simple example. Saving $150 a month sounds attractive, until you realize it costs $300,000 more in total interest. That's the price of a second home, a college fund, or a retirement portfolio. Imagine investing that same amount monthly in an S&P 500 index fund from age 30 to 60. A person could build hundreds of thousands in wealth instead of handing it to the bank. But illusions don't let people think that far. They keep the focus on today, never tomorrow. Spiritually, illusions are dangerous because they distort perception. They make slavery feel like stability. Just like Israel under Pharaoh, people get used to burdens as if they were normal. A 50-year mortgage feels acceptable only because culture normalizes financial exhaustion. But Scripture teaches stewardship, not survival. Wisdom is long-term. Bondage is always short-term comfort in exchange for long-term loss. That's why Jesus said to count the cost before committing to anything. Once a person wakes up to this illusion, they begin to see how the system manipulates expectation. What feels affordable is often the most expensive choice of all. And if the illusion of lower payments hides such massive consequences, the next logical question is, what does the math actually reveal when we strip away the marketing? That's exactly what the next topic exposes with real numbers that most people never dare to calculate. The math they never show you. How tiny savings turn into massive lifetime losses. When people look at a mortgage offer, they see one number, the monthly payment. That's exactly what the system wants. But wise stewardship requires looking at the entire cost, not the emotional comfort of the moment. Jesus himself said in Luke 14:28, "Which of you wanting to build a tower does not first sit down and calculate the cost?" Long-term debt is the modern tower people build without counting. And when they finally see the numbers, it's usually too late to undo decades of lost money. The math reveals a painful truth. Small monthly savings hide enormous lifetime losses. A borrower may save $80 or $200 a month, but end up paying $300,000 to $600,000 more over the life of the loan. That's not a discount. That's a financial ambush disguised as affordability. If someone took that same difference and invested it monthly in index funds, dividend stocks, or a Roth IRA, they could make money that compounds into generational wealth instead of compounding into generational debt. Most people never run these calculations because the system trains them to think in payments, not totals. But totals reveal everything. Imagine two people buying identical homes. One pays it off in 30 years, the other in 50. The 30-year borrower enters their 60s with equity, margin, and freedom. They can invest, give generously, support a business, or help their children. The 50-year borrower enters their 70s still paying the bank. The math doesn't just affect money, it affects destiny. What makes this even more troubling is how mortgage structures allocate payments. In the early years, almost everything goes to interest. It's not designed to help families build equity early. It's designed to protect the lender's profits. That's why the first 10 to 15 years feel like financial quicksand. People make money, but none of it works for them. It works for the system. It's the opposite of biblical stewardship, where seed is meant to multiply, not evaporate. A simple spreadsheet can open someone's eyes instantly. Take a $450,000 mortgage at 6% over 30 years versus 6.75% over 50. The savings each month look comforting, but the lifetime interest more than doubles. That's money that could have funded missions, started a business, or built a retirement portfolio. Instead, it becomes fuel for an institution that thrives when people remain uninformed. That's why Scripture says, "My people perish for a lack of knowledge." But when a person finally understands the math behind the illusion, they begin to see the system with spiritual clarity. And once the numbers expose the truth, the next question becomes unavoidable. If the math clearly harms the borrower, then who exactly is being protected and enriched by this structure? That's where the next topic exposes the bigger machine behind the curtain. Who really wins? Banks, builders, politicians, and the Babylonian machine of profit. Behind every long-term mortgage, there's a system designed with one goal: profit, not protection. And when you look closely, the winners are always the same: institutions, not individuals. Banks thrive because decades of interest become guaranteed streams of money. Builders win because extended loan terms make overpriced homes seem affordable. Politicians benefit because they can claim they helped families without addressing the real issue. It's a business ecosystem that survives by keeping people too distracted to make money with wisdom. The Bible paints a clear picture of systems like this. In Revelation and Daniel, Babylon represents not just a city, but a structure, a network built on exploitation disguised as prosperity. Today, that spirit shows up in financial systems that look helpful on the surface, but extract wealth quietly over time. A 50-year mortgage is a perfect example. It stabilizes markets, boosts investor confidence, increases loan volume, and strengthens banks, all while draining the borrower's future. Banks especially profit because interest-first repayment schedules prioritize their gain above the borrower's progress. For most of the loan, money never touches the principal. It feeds institutional profit. And remember, banks don't want you debt-free. They want you dependable. A borrower who spends 50 years paying is far more valuable than one who pays off their loan early and begins using their money to invest, build a business, or make money independently. Builders also gain because extending loan terms increases buyer eligibility. When more people qualify, demand surges, and prices climb. It's the same dynamic Israel faced when Egyptian overseers increased pressure yet claimed it was for productivity. Builders know that if they can stretch loan lengths, they can stretch prices without resistance. Affordability becomes a marketing illusion rather than an economic reality. Politicians benefit because these extended-term mortgages stimulate the economy without requiring structural reform. They can claim victory while avoiding the hard work of addressing zoning laws, wage stagnation, or inflation. A temporary sense of relief becomes a political tool, not a financial solution. It mirrors how kingdoms in Scripture often offered comfort while quietly tightening control, creating dependence instead of empowerment. And at the top of this pyramid sit institutional investors, Wall Street, hedge funds, pension funds, who rely on mortgage-backed securities as predictable income streams. A 50-year mortgage isn't a blessing to families. It's a golden ticket for investors who want stability and yield. But once you understand who truly wins, you see why the system fights so hard to preserve itself. And if these institutions benefit so greatly, the next question becomes obvious. What happens to the person caught inside this machine for the rest of their life? That's where the next topic reveals the human cost. The long-term trap. Why debt until old age destroys wealth, purpose, and biblical stewardship. Living with debt until old age does more than drain money. It slowly erodes a person's sense of purpose. Scripture shows that God designed the latter years of life to be years of rest, wisdom, and fruitful legacy. Psalm 92 says the righteous will still bear fruit in old age, but that becomes nearly impossible when someone is still sending mortgage payments instead of investing, giving, or building. Debt stretches life thin, making people work longer, not because they want to, but because they must. When someone enters their 70s and 80s still owing the bank, it reshapes their entire future. Instead of enjoying grandchildren, mentoring younger believers, or starting a small business that fuels their calling, they're trapped maintaining obligations from decisions made decades earlier. It's a slow drain on purpose. A system that requires a lifetime to pay back a home isn't just inefficient, it's spiritually disorienting. It keeps a person focused on survival rather than stewardship. The impact on wealth is staggering. A borrower who pays off a home at 55 has 2 full decades to make money work for them through investments, index funds, real estate, or entrepreneurial ventures. But someone who pays until 80 has nearly 0 compounding years left. Ecclesiastes teaches that there is a time to plant and a time to harvest. But debt until old age eliminates the harvest season entirely. It's like a farmer who works his whole life yet never sees the field bloom. This also affects health. Stress from financial pressure is one of the most overlooked spiritual battles. Proverbs 12:25 says, "An anxious heart weighs a man down." And few things create more long-term anxiety than knowing the bank owns your home well into your retirement years. People lose sleep, lose energy, and lose opportunities because their money is tied to obligations instead of freedom. The spiritual cost becomes as real as the financial one. And let's talk about legacy. Scripture places enormous importance on inheritance, leaving blessing, not burdens. But a 50-year mortgage often means leaving debt, not wealth. Every dollar tied to interest is a dollar not invested in children, ministry, or future business opportunities. It's a painful reversal of Proverbs 13:22, which says, "A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children." But that becomes nearly impossible when decades of payments consume the very money meant for legacy. When someone finally recognizes the true cost of lifelong debt, lost wealth, lost purpose, lost rest, they begin to question how such a system ever became normal. And that question opens a door to something powerful. If the culture pushes people toward lifetime repayment, what does God offer as the path to freedom, sovereignty, and wise stewardship? That's exactly where the final topic reveals the roadmap. Breaking free, biblical models, practical wisdom, and God's blueprint for financial sovereignty. Breaking free from lifetime debt begins with a shift in identity. Scripture never calls God's people to be permanent borrowers. It calls them to be stewards, builders, and leaders who manage money with purpose. Deuteronomy 28 says God's people would lend to many nations but borrow from none. Not because they were lucky, but because they followed divine principles that empowered them to make money, build wisely, and protect their future. Freedom starts with understanding that debt is not your destiny. From a practical standpoint, the path to freedom mirrors biblical patterns: short-term sacrifice for long-term blessing. Just as Joseph stored grain during 7 years of abundance, a modern believer can create margin by cutting expenses, building an emergency fund, refinancing to shorter terms, or aggressively paying down principal. It's not about being rich, it's about being intentional. Even small extra payments can shave years off a mortgage and redirect money toward investments that multiply instead of evaporating. Investing becomes a crucial part of breaking the cycle. Scripture teaches sowing and reaping, and in today's world, that often looks like index funds, dividend portfolios, real estate partnerships, or starting a small business. These are ways to make money work for you rather than working for the bank. A believer who invests consistently for 20 years can build what some families never accumulate in 50 years of payments. The goal isn't greed, it's stewardship with generational impact. Another step toward financial sovereignty is learning contentment, a biblical weapon against cultural pressure. Most people get trapped in long mortgages because they chase homes sized for ego instead of purpose. But wisdom begins with choosing a home that fits calling, not comparison. Proverbs 24:3 says, "By wisdom a house is built," meaning the structure of your life, not just the building you live in. When you detach an identity from possessions, you gain power over your money instead of letting money rule over you. Community and mentorship also play a major role. The early church thrived because believers supported one another, shared wisdom, and refused to let anyone fall into silent bondage. Today, meeting with financial mentors, joining groups focused on stewardship, or seeking counsel from those who built business with integrity can change a family tree. God rarely frees people in isolation. He frees them through community, wisdom, and accountability. But the most powerful step is recognizing that financial freedom is deeply spiritual. When a believer stops renting from the system and starts living aligned with God's blueprint, everything changes. Purpose gets clearer. Generosity grows and pressure lifts. And as we transition into the introduction of this message, one question rises above all others. How do we help people see the trap before they step into it? That's where the story begins. When you finally understand how the mortgage system was built, something shifts inside you. You stop seeing yourself as a victim of the economy and start seeing the truth. God did not design you to live in lifetime debt. He designed you to walk in wisdom, build with purpose, and manage money in a way that strengthens your future instead of draining it. The world may push you toward survival, but Scripture pushes you toward stewardship, and that's where real freedom begins. So now the question is simple. What will you do with what you've learned? Will you continue letting a system decide how long you work, how much you pay, and how little you keep? Or will you start building a financial life that aligns with your calling, one where your money works for you, your business serves your purpose, and every decision brings you closer to the life God intended? Your next moves will shape your next decades, and maybe the most important question of all, what legacy will you leave behind? Debt, stress, and exhaustion, or wisdom, wealth, and generational strength? This is the moment to break patterns, challenge assumptions, and take back control from a system that benefits when you stay blind. Freedom doesn't come from wishing. It comes from action, courage, and revelation lived out daily. Write in the comments, "I refuse to live in lifetime debt." And watch how this powerful declaration begins to shift the course of your business and your finances from this day forward. If this message opened your eyes or stirred something inside you, consider supporting our ministry through the link in the description. Your seed helps us continue teaching people how to break free from financial bondage and build lives aligned with God's design. And don't forget to subscribe and activate notifications so you never miss another teaching that could change your money, your business, and your future.